The aliens had never imagined that life could turn so cruel. For centuries, they had lived among the stars peacefully. Their world was full of colors that humans could never see, and skies that shone with more than one sun. On their home planets, families gathered in ways that were strange but beautiful. They celebrated the turning of moons, the rise of new stars, and every new life with dances that lasted hours. The galaxy knew them as calm and wise, creatures who valued learning and friendship above all. But one small misunderstanding changed everything. It started as a disagreement. Another civilization accused them of something they had not done, and despite their attempts to explain, no one listened. Words became arguments, arguments became threats, and soon, the Council of the Galaxy passed a sentence that no one could reverse. They were banished. The aliens could not remain in the galaxy they had called home for thousands of years. No planet, no star system, no corner of space would accept them anymore. They were cast into the void, alone and unwanted. The moment they left their home world, a heavy silence fell over their ships. The silence was different from the calm of space they were used to. It was deep, sad, and heavy with loss. They drifted past planets they had once visited, remembering every smile, every friendly gesture, and every shared story. They had no weapons, no armies, no one to protect them. They only had their ships and each other. And yet in the darkness there was still a small spark of hope. Somewhere far away, there had to be a place that would welcome them. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The cold of space was no longer just a temperature. It became a feeling, wrapping itself around their hearts. They saw stars explode in the distance and comets fly past, yet none of it seemed to reach them. Their minds were full of memories of home, and their hearts carried grief too heavy to share. They spoke to each other in whispers, sharing their fears and dreams. "We will survive," one would say. "We have to," another would reply. Even in despair, the aliens clung to the idea that life could still be good somewhere. They traveled past familiar constellations, past galaxies that once seemed friendly, but now felt hostile and cold. Every time a star system rejected them, their hope dimmed a little more. They learned quickly how cruel the universe could be. It was not just the expanse of space. It was the people they had once trusted who had turned away. They had been labeled criminals, outcasts, even monsters. None of it was true, yet the label followed them wherever they went. During the long months of travel, they began to talk about Earth. They had learned of this blue planet from distant transmissions. Rumors passed quietly between civilizations. Earth was small, almost insignificant in the grand galaxy, but it was rich in life. Oceans teemed with strange creatures. Forests stretched farther than the eye could see, and the planet seemed to thrive despite wars and disasters. "Maybe Earth will accept us," they whispered among themselves. It was a fragile hope, but it was better than none at all. Their journey toward Earth was filled with obstacles. Their ships were not built for such long travel alone, and repairs had to be done with limited supplies. Meteor showers threatened to tear them apart, and once they had to maneuver through a collapsing star system, barely escaping destruction. Hunger, fatigue, and loneliness weighed on them, yet each challenge reminded them of their strength. Every small victory, like fixing a damaged engine or navigating past a dangerous asteroid belt, became a reason to keep going. One night, as they floated near a distant star, one of them looked back at the void they had come from. The memory of home was a wound that never healed. They remembered the laughter of family gatherings, the songs sung under twin suns, and the gentle hum of their cities at night. They remembered friends who had tried to defend them, even when the galaxy turned its back. And they wept, not only for what they had lost, but also for the uncertainty of what lay ahead. But in the darkness, a new thought began to grow. Perhaps being banished was not the end. Perhaps being unwanted in the galaxy meant that they could find something new, something different, something better. They could start again somewhere no one had ever expected them to arrive. And Earth, with its endless blue oceans and green lands, might just be that place. The aliens studied Earth from afar, sending tiny probes that observed silently. They watched the humans, a curious and unpredictable species, and marveled at how they survived despite wars, natural disasters, and conflicts among themselves. They were messy, fragile, and sometimes cruel, but there was a spark in them, a resilience that reminded the aliens of their own lost world. For the first time in months, they felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps they could belong somewhere again. As they approached the solar system, They felt tension building, fear mingled with hope. What if humans did not welcome them? What if Earth too turned them away? They had faced rejection for so long that the thought of more was almost unbearable. Yet they could not turn back. Their home had been lost and the galaxy had cast them out. Forward was the only direction left. Their ships entered the outer edges of the solar system, and Earth appeared as a small, fragile blue dot. It was beautiful in ways that made them pause. Oceans glittered like scattered gems. Clouds drifted gracefully across continents, and the greens and browns of land reminded them faintly of home. They did not yet understand the people who lived there, but they understood something important. This planet was alive, and it seemed willing to give life to all who reached it. For the first time, the aliens allowed themselves to dream of a new beginning. Maybe here, they would not be judged by the mistakes of the past. Maybe here they could live openly, teach what they had learned, and share the wisdom of centuries. Maybe here they could finally find a place where their hearts were not heavy with grief. But the journey was not over. Even as hope grew, fear lingered. They did not know the language, the customs, or the limits of the humans who lived on Earth. They had to approach carefully, silently, and with patience. One wrong move could turn this fragile chance into disaster. They spent long hours discussing plans, imagining the reactions, and preparing themselves for a world unlike any they had known. Yet, despite the uncertainty, a quiet determination took root. The aliens had survived the galaxy's betrayal. They had faced loneliness, hunger, and danger, and they were still alive. If the galaxy had taught them anything, it was that life could be cruel, but life could also offer second chances. Earth was that chance. The unknown stretched before them like an open road, and they were ready to take the first steps. And so, as the blue planet grew larger in their viewports, the aliens felt something they had not felt in a long time: hope. It was fragile and delicate, like the first leaf of spring after a long winter, but it was real. Perhaps finally, they were approaching a place that could become home. Perhaps finally they would be welcomed not with fear or judgment, but with understanding. The journey through the void had been long and painful, but the destination promised something worth every hardship: a chance to belong again. The journey toward Earth was far from easy. Even after leaving the galaxy that had cast them out, the aliens found that the universe held challenges they had never imagined. Space was not empty as it seemed from a distance. It was filled with dangers, many of which were invisible until it was almost too late. Meteor storms could strike without warning. Powerful cosmic winds could push ships off course, and stars themselves could explode with a force that nothing could survive. Every day of travel tested not only their skill, but also their patience and courage. The aliens had learned long ago that survival required careful planning. Their ships were built for long journeys, but even the strongest engines could fail under extreme conditions. They spent hours repairing, maintaining, and double-checking every system. No one spoke of panic aloud, but behind closed doors, fear was constant. Every time the ship's alarms went off, hearts would race, and every movement had to be precise. A single mistake could cost them their lives. Yet even in these moments of danger, they learned something important. Fear did not mean failure. It reminded them to be careful, to focus, and to value each day they survived. Food and water were another concern. The aliens had limited supplies, and while their bodies were different from humans, they still needed nourishment. They had stored dehydrated foods which could last months, but nothing could replace the comfort of sharing a meal together. They had a ritual of sorts. Each day they would gather in the small common area of the ship and eat quietly, sometimes speaking softly about memories from home or dreams of Earth. These moments, small as they were, became the heart of their survival. They reminded them of what they were fighting for, not just life, but a life worth living. Loneliness was perhaps the hardest enemy of all. Even when they were together, the silence of space weighed heavily on them. They were far from their home planets, far from friends and family, and far from anyone who truly understood them. Some nights they would stare out of the small windows of their ships and think about the worlds they had lost. Stars twinkled in patterns they once knew by heart. Yet now those patterns felt like reminders of everything that was gone. And yet, even in the darkest moments, they found comfort in each other. Small gestures, a touch on the arm, a shared laugh, a word of encouragement, were enough to remind them that they were not completely alone. During their long journey, they encountered many strange and beautiful sights. Nebulas glowed like massive paintings in the void, their colors shifting slowly over weeks. Black holes lurked silently, devouring light and matter with terrifying power. Occasionally they saw distant planets teeming with life, though none would offer them sanctuary. Each sight reminded them of the vastness of the universe and the smallness of their own place in it. Yet these wonders also inspired them. Even in exile, the universe held beauty, and they clung to it as proof that good things could still exist. One day, as they passed a particularly dense asteroid field, a sudden collision alarm shattered the quiet. A small rock had hit one of the outer shields of their ship. Sparks flew and the hum of the engines faltered. Panic rose in their chests, but they worked together quickly, checking systems, reinforcing the shields, and patching the damage. It took hours, but eventually the ship stabilized. Afterward, they gathered quietly and reflected on how fragile life could be. They realized that every moment they survived was a gift, and that their journey was more than just a path to Earth. It was a test of their perseverance, skill, and unity. As the months passed, the aliens began to learn more about Earth. They had relied on distant transmissions and second-hand reports, but now they could study it more closely. They learned about the planet's oceans, mountains, and forests. They observed its seasons, its weather patterns, and the creatures that roamed its lands and skies. Humans fascinated them the most. These beings were fragile and sometimes unpredictable, but they showed resilience that the aliens admired. Humans had survived wars, famine, and disasters, yet they continued to hope and build. In this way, humans reminded the aliens of themselves before exile, a species capable of great cooperation, creativity, and courage. Despite their careful planning, the aliens knew that approaching Earth would be risky. They could not simply land and expect acceptance. They had no knowledge of human languages or customs. They did not know whether humans would welcome them or fear them. Even as they felt hope, they also felt anxiety. What if the blue planet, which had seemed like a safe haven from afar, turned out to be hostile? What if humans reacted with fear or violence as the galaxy had done? These questions haunted them, but they also motivated them to prepare more carefully, to observe silently, and to plan every move with caution. During this time, the aliens discovered something unexpected. Moments of joy, small things, like watching a comet streak across the sky or seeing the sunlight reflect off a distant planet, brought smiles to their faces. They shared stories from home, tales of festivals, family gatherings, and celebrations under twin suns. These memories became a kind of medicine for their hearts, reminding them that life, even in exile, could still hold happiness. They laughed at small jokes, played quiet games to pass the time, and comforted each other during nights when the emptiness of space felt unbearable. These human-like moments were essential, and they bonded the group closer together. Communication among themselves became more intimate as the journey continued. Words were not enough to express the depth of their emotions, so they developed subtle ways of sharing feelings, gestures, changes in tone, and even silent looks. Every member of the group became aware of the other's moods and needs. When one felt afraid, another would offer reassurance. When one felt exhausted, others would take over tasks without complaint. This cooperation was crucial for survival, but it also reminded them of the families and communities they had lost. One night, as the ship drifted near a distant star, the aliens experienced a rare phenomenon, a space storm that filled the sky with colors they had never seen before. Red, purple, green, and gold swirled together, reflected on the metal of their ship like a living painting. They watched silently, mesmerized. No words were needed. In that moment, they shared a collective sense of wonder. It was a reminder that the universe, vast and dangerous as it was, still had moments of beauty worth traveling for. Even as exiles, they were part of something larger, something alive and magnificent. As Earth grew closer in their viewports, anticipation built among them. They could see the curvature of the planet, the blue of the oceans, and the green of the land. The clouds moved gracefully across continents, creating shadows that danced on the surface below. For the first time in months, the aliens felt a thrill that was almost childlike, the excitement of reaching a new home. The journey had been long, dangerous, and full of uncertainty, but the reward now appeared tangible. Earth was not just a dot in space anymore, it was a place of possibility, a chance to start anew. Even as hope surged, fear lingered. They knew humans might not understand them. They had no way of predicting reactions, and the consequences of mistakes could be fatal. To prepare, they discussed every possible scenario. They considered ways to communicate without causing panic, how to show they meant no harm, and how to approach the planet carefully. Every decision was weighed, every action planned. Their past taught them the importance of caution. Exile had made them wary, but it had also made them wise. Despite the tension, the aliens felt a strange sense of peace. After months of drifting through the void, they had survived storms, hunger, loneliness, and fear. They had relied on each other, learned from each challenge, and grown stronger. The hardships had shaped them, not just as exiles, but as a family. And now, as Earth beckoned, they realized that the journey had prepared them for the next chapter of their lives. They were ready, not just to survive, but to live. The first approach toward Earth was tentative. They did not immediately descend. Instead, they circled the planet from high above, observing oceans, mountains, and cities from a safe distance. They studied human patterns, noting movement and behavior. Every observation was a piece of preparation, a way to reduce the risk of misunderstanding. They learned patience, a lesson drilled into them by exile, and applied it carefully. For once, waiting was a tool, not a burden. And as they hovered above the planet, the aliens allowed themselves a small hope, fragile but real. Perhaps Earth would be different from the galaxy that had rejected them. Perhaps humans could be allies or even friends. Perhaps here at last they could find safety, belonging, and a chance to rebuild what exile had taken away. For the first time in many months, they allowed themselves to imagine a future, not just a survival. They imagined laughter, conversation, and life that was full, meaningful, and shared. The journey through the void had been long, painful, and uncertain. They had faced dangers that tested their skill and patience. They had struggled with fear, loneliness, and grief. And yet, through it all, they had survived. Now, as Earth came closer with every passing hour, they understood something essential. Survival alone was not enough. Life was also about hope, connection, and the possibility of new beginnings. Earth represented all of that, and they were determined to reach it no matter what challenges remained. After months of traveling through the cold, lonely void of space, the aliens finally reached the edge of the solar system. Earth appeared in the distance as a small, fragile blue sphere, floating in the darkness. Even from far away, it looked alive. The blues of the oceans shimmered like glass, the greens of the forests seemed endless, and the white clouds drifted gracefully across the surface. It was unlike anything they had seen before. In all their journeys through galaxies and star systems, no planet had seemed so inviting, so full of life and energy. For a long while, the aliens did not move closer. They hovered at a safe distance, studying the planet silently. They were cautious, aware that any mistake could lead to disaster. Their long exile had taught them that appearances could be deceiving, and that not every world was kind to outsiders. Still, despite the caution, there was excitement in the group. They had survived storms, hunger, loneliness, and fear. Now they were close to a place that might finally welcome them. Observing Earth, they noticed the diversity of life everywhere. The oceans teemed with movement, schools of fish glinting like tiny stars beneath the surface. Forests stretched across continents, full of trees, flowers, and creatures of every size. Birds flew across the sky in intricate patterns, and on land, animals moved freely, unaware of the tiny ships observing them from above. The aliens were fascinated. Life here was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes chaotic, but it was also beautiful and resilient. It reminded them of what they had lost and of what they hoped to find. Humans were more complicated to understand. From high above, the aliens saw cities, highways, and small towns scattered across continents. People moved quickly, often seeming to rush without reason, yet sometimes pausing to gather, talk, or play. The aliens watched families, children running through parks, people helping each other in small ways, and strangers going about their daily routines. There was fear in some eyes, curiosity in others, but most seemed too busy with their own lives to notice the tiny ships hovering above. For the first time in months, the aliens felt that the world below might truly be a place of possibility. They discussed what they had observed. The humans are fragile, one said, but they have spirit. They survive through hardship and continue to build, to love, to hope. Maybe they can understand us. Another replied, perhaps, but we must be careful. We do not know how they will react to beings from another world. If they panic, it could be dangerous. Their voices carried a mixture of hope and caution. Every decision was weighed, every action considered. They had learned from the galaxy that judgment could come too quickly, and they did not want to make the same mistake here. For days, they circled the planet, observing silently. They mapped human activity, watched patterns of movement, and tried to understand the rhythms of life. They noted where humans gathered in large numbers, where they seemed peaceful, and where conflict arose. Each observation taught them more about the world and the beings who lived there. They realized that humans were complex, sometimes unpredictable, but also capable of kindness, cooperation, and creativity. These qualities reminded the aliens of themselves before exile, a time when they had been part of a larger community, respected and understood. As they studied Earth, they also began to notice the small moments that made life beautiful. Children laughing as they ran through fields, a father helping his child climb a tree, strangers sharing food or comforting one another in times of trouble. These simple acts of care fascinated the aliens. They had survived exile, but they had also survived without the warmth of a community. Watching humans help each other, they realized how powerful small acts of kindness could be. It was a lesson they would carry with them when they finally made contact. The aliens debated how to approach the planet. Should they reveal themselves immediately, or continue to observe for longer? Some argued that waiting would allow them to understand humans better, reducing the risk of misunderstanding. Others felt that patience could turn into hesitation, and that sooner or later they had to take the step toward contact. In the end, they decided on a careful approach. They would observe for a while longer, send subtle signals, and only then make their presence known. This way, they could ensure the first impression was one of peace, not threat. At night, the aliens observed lights from human cities. From above, the cities looked like glowing webs stretching across the land. They noticed how humans seemed drawn to the lights, how communities formed around them, and how life pulsed with constant energy. It reminded the aliens of their own cities from the home planets, though smaller and more chaotic. Yet, there was something familiar in the patterns, evidence that life, no matter where it existed, sought connection and meaning. Communication among the aliens became more focused during this time. They discussed the language humans might understand, the ways to show friendliness, and the actions that could cause fear. They practiced signals, gestures, and even silent ways of conveying emotion. They had to prepare not just for survival but for connection. If they were to be welcomed on Earth, they had to show they were not a threat. Every detail mattered. The aliens also reflected on their own past. Exile had taught them humility, patience, and resilience. They remembered the friends and family they had lost, the planets that had rejected them, and the harsh lessons of the galaxy. But they also remembered the good: community, learning, creativity, and hope. They wanted to carry these lessons forward, not just for their own survival, but to help build something meaningful on Earth. The planet seemed to offer a second chance, a blank slate where they could contribute without fear of judgment. As they moved closer, they noticed Earth's natural cycles, the tides, the winds, the movement of clouds. They saw rivers winding through forests, mountains standing tall against the sky, and deserts stretching endlessly. Each observation reminded them of the delicate balance of life. Earth was vibrant yet fragile. The aliens understood that if they were to live here, they had to respect this balance. They could not impose themselves recklessly. They had to be careful, thoughtful, and observant. One day, while hovering over a coastal area, they witnessed a storm forming. Lightning split the sky and waves crashed violently against the shore. Some humans rushed to shelter, while others helped each other evacuate or protect property. The aliens watched silently, amazed at both the destructive power of nature and the resilience of humans. Even in chaos, life found a way to continue. The aliens felt a growing admiration for these beings who struggled, survived, and cared for one another in the face of danger. During this observation, a quiet sense of hope grew among the group. Earth might not be perfect, but it was alive, full of possibility, and surprisingly welcoming in its energy. For the first time in a long while, the aliens allowed themselves to imagine life on this planet. They imagined building, learning, and sharing with the humans below. They imagined laughter, conversation, and companionship. Most importantly, they imagined finally belonging somewhere again. They also discussed strategy. How would they make first contact? Should they reveal their full appearance or approach subtly? How would humans interpret their presence? They practiced signals, gestures, and even lights that could convey calm and peace. Every day they prepared more thoroughly. Each plan was tested, revised, and rehearsed. They knew that one wrong step could mean rejection or fear, but they also knew that careful preparation could make the difference between acceptance and disaster. Despite all the planning, they could not help but feel excitement. For months they had lived in fear and uncertainty, drifting through the void with no home and no hope. Now Earth was close enough to touch, a place that might finally offer safety and belonging. The excitement was almost tangible in their shared glances and subtle gestures. Even the smallest observations, birds flying, waves crashing, humans smiling, felt like signs that life could be good again. As the days passed, they began to identify areas where first contact might be safest. Remote regions with minimal human activity were ideal for initial landing. These areas would allow them to study humans up close without causing panic. They noted the geography, climate, and wildlife of these regions, preparing for every possibility. Observation became their key tool. Silent, careful, and respectful, every piece of information brought them closer to understanding the humans and to finding a way to integrate safely. Finally, after weeks of careful observation, the aliens felt ready. They had learned much about the planet, its people, and its rhythms. They had developed strategies, practiced gestures, and discussed every scenario. They had also allowed themselves to hope, to imagine life that was no longer about survival alone, but about belonging and connection. Earth was no longer just a distant blue dot. It had become a world of potential, a place where exiles might finally find a home. The first approach would be cautious, careful, and deliberate. They would reveal themselves not with fear or aggression, but with signals of peace and understanding. Every action, every movement would be guided by respect for the humans and the planet they now hope to call home. Months of travel, observation, and preparation had led to this moment. The aliens were ready to take the next step, to cross the invisible boundary between exile and belonging. And as they descended SLA, the aliens approached Earth slowly, moving over forests, rivers, and mountains with careful precision. They had spent weeks observing humans, their cities, their ways of living, and their patterns of movement. Every step of the approach was planned, every gesture considered. They did not want to frighten anyone, and they understood that humans could react unpredictably. They had learned from their experiences in the galaxy that first impressions mattered more than anything. When they descended closer to the ground, the landscape was breathtaking. Forests stretched in endless waves of green. Rivers wound gracefully like silver ribbons, and mountains rose like silent guardians. The aliens were amazed at the diversity of life. Birds flew overhead, insects crawled on leaves, and small animals moved through the undergrowth. Even the wind seemed alive, carrying scents, sounds, and subtle vibrations. For the first time in their long exile, the aliens felt at peace. This was a world where life thrived, and they wanted to be a part of it without disturbing the natural balance. They chose a remote area to make their first contact. It was a place far from cities and towns where humans appeared only occasionally. They observed from a distance, waiting for the right moment. When they finally revealed themselves, it was subtle, a soft glow, a gentle movement that did not threaten. They wanted humans to notice them slowly, to see them as living beings, not monsters or invaders. At first, humans reacted with curiosity rather than fear. A small group of people had been exploring the forest and noticed unusual lights and movements in the distance. They stopped, unsure of what they were seeing. The aliens, sensing their hesitation, remained still, letting the humans take the first step. Slowly, the humans approached, keeping a cautious distance, their eyes wide with wonder. No one ran, no one shouted. They were curious, and that curiosity allowed the first connection to form. The aliens tried to communicate. They did not speak in human language. They did not yet know it well enough. But they used gestures, patterns of light, and gentle movements to signal peaceful intent. They demonstrated they meant no harm, and that they wished only to be understood. The humans watched carefully, some whispering to each other, trying to make sense of the strange beings before them. The forest was quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. It was not easy at first. Humans were cautious, sometimes stepping back when the aliens moved closer. But the aliens were patient. They understood fear because they had lived with it themselves for so long. They did not force contact or demand attention. Instead, they waited, showing through repeated gestures that they wanted to share, not to dominate. Slowly, the humans began to relax, sensing that these creatures, though different, were not dangerous. One of the humans, a scientist, decided to take a small step forward. She held out her hand in a gesture of trust, a simple act that spoke more than words. The aliens responded in kind, extending a tendril-like appendage gently without touch at first, then allowing a subtle connection. It was a moment of understanding, a bridge between worlds. The other humans, seeing this, began to follow, tentatively joining in the silent communication. In that quiet forest under the shade of tall trees, the first contact was made. The aliens shared small pieces of knowledge carefully. They demonstrated how their hands could manipulate objects, how they could generate energy safely, and how they had survived in space for so long. Humans watched with fascination, asking questions and making small gestures to show understanding. It was not just communication, it was a moment of learning from each other. The aliens had been rejected by the galaxy, but here on Earth they discovered that curiosity and openness could build trust. Even as the initial contact succeeded, both sides remained cautious. The aliens did not yet reveal everything about themselves. They wanted humans to understand gradually, to adjust to the idea that beings from another world were here to help, not harm. They demonstrated patience, waiting for humans to respond and only moving forward when the signs of trust were clear. This patience became a cornerstone of their early interactions, and it taught the humans an unexpected lesson about understanding and respect. Nature seemed to welcome them as well. Birds continued to fly nearby, animals moved without fear, and the wind carried the sounds of the forest without disturbance. The aliens sensed this as a subtle affirmation. Earth itself allowed the connection to begin. It was as if the planet recognized the importance of this encounter, giving both humans and aliens a chance to learn from each other without immediate conflict. The aliens were careful to honor that gift, moving with deliberate respect and awareness. Over time, small groups of humans joined the first explorers. Scientists, naturalists, and even ordinary villagers came to observe. They were fascinated by the aliens' presence, their knowledge, and their gentle ways. Some humans tried to offer food or water, unsure if the aliens needed it. The aliens communicated that they did not require such things in the same way, but they appreciated the gesture, recognizing it as a sign of goodwill. Mutual understanding began to take root. The aliens shared lessons learned from exile. They spoke without words of the dangers of mistrust, the consequences of fear, and the importance of cooperation. They showed humans how to observe carefully, how to respect life, and how to survive in ways that did not destroy the balance of nature. Humans listened, sometimes with amazement, sometimes with skepticism, but always with curiosity. This exchange of knowledge was subtle but profound, bridging centuries of difference with small, careful steps. There were moments of tension, of course. Some humans feared the unknown, whispering about dangers and imagining worst-case scenarios. The aliens responded with patience, continuing to demonstrate their intentions through calm gestures and transparent actions. Over time, fear diminished, replaced by fascination and wonder. Humans realized that these beings, though alien, were not here to conquer or harm. Instead, they were here to coexist, to share and to learn together. The first night after contact was peaceful. Humans and aliens sat quietly under the stars, sharing space without words. The aliens observed the humans' way of life, how they moved, how they spoke, how they interacted with each other. They learned quickly that humans, while fragile, were capable of incredible empathy and creativity. They could laugh, cry, work together, and protect each other. These traits reminded the aliens of their own kind before exile, and it gave them hope that life on Earth could be meaningful again. By the following days, the relationship deepened. Humans began to trust the aliens more openly. They allowed closer observation, asked questions, and even attempted to mimic some gestures to communicate more effectively. The aliens in turn responded with patience and understanding, teaching small lessons about energy, balance, and cooperation. The forest where first contact had occurred became a place of quiet learning, a laboratory of understanding between two very different species. The aliens also learned about humans in return. They observed family bonds, the joys of small communities, and the ways people helped one another in times of trouble. They saw creativity in action, from painting to music, from storytelling to building, even the small everyday acts, helping a neighbor, caring for animals, or tending a garden, taught the aliens about the complexity and resilience of life on Earth. For the first time in a long while, they felt that connection, that belonging, might be possible here. One morning, after weeks of careful interaction, a human child approached the aliens. The child was cautious but curious, holding a flower and offering it gently. The aliens observed this gesture with wonder. It was simple yet profound, a pure act of trust and curiosity. They responded with a soft glow, a pattern of light that expressed gratitude and friendship. The humans around them smiled, realizing that understanding could be achieved without fear, through gestures, patience, and empathy. This small act became a turning point. It showed both humans and aliens that connection was possible, and that fear could be overcome through patience and understanding. The forest, once a place of cautious observation, became a symbol of hope, a place where two worlds could meet and learn from each other. The aliens had been rejected by the galaxy, but here they were welcomed not with judgment but with curiosity and care. Even as the weeks passed, both sides continued to learn. Humans taught the aliens about Earth's history, culture, and ways of life. Aliens shared stories of space, survival, and lessons learned from exile. The exchange was slow, careful, and respectful, but it built a foundation of trust that neither side had experienced before. The aliens realized that Earth was not just a refuge. It was a place where understanding, knowledge, and compassion could grow. By the end of the first month, the aliens had established a stable connection with humans. Communication, though still limited, was meaningful. Gestures, light patterns, and careful observation allowed them to teach, share, and connect. Humans began to see the aliens not as strangers or invaders, but as allies, teachers, and friends. And the aliens, for the first time since their exile, felt that belonging might be possible. The first contact was not perfect. There were moments of misunderstanding, fear, and hesitation. But through patience, careful observation, and a willingness to learn from each other, humans. After weeks of cautious interaction, the aliens began to feel more comfortable on Earth. The humans had shown patience, curiosity, and kindness, and that openness allowed the aliens to gradually reveal more about themselves. At first, it was small things, gestures to demonstrate trust, patterns of light to communicate ideas, and subtle ways to show understanding. But over time, humans and aliens began to interact in more meaningful ways, and a quiet partnership started to form. The aliens were fascinated by human communities. They observed villages and towns, learning how people work together to build homes, grow food, and care for one another. They saw humans celebrate festivals, share meals, and teach their children lessons about life. The aliens had once lived in societies that were organized, harmonious, and peaceful, but they had lost that world. Seeing humans work together in imperfect but genuine ways reminded them of what home had been like, and it gave them hope that belonging was possible again. Humans, in turn, were eager to learn from the aliens. They had never seen beings from another world, and the knowledge the aliens carried was unlike anything humans had encountered before. They shared lessons learned from surviving exile, how to live with limited resources, how to navigate dangerous environments, and how to adapt to unexpected challenges. Humans listened intently, asking questions, experimenting, and practicing what they learned. The exchange was slow but rewarding, and both sides began to appreciate the value of patience and observation. Integration was not always easy. There were moments of misunderstanding, moments when humans acted out of fear, and moments when the aliens' actions were confusing. The aliens were careful to explain themselves in subtle ways, using gestures, demonstrations, and symbols that humans could understand. Humans, in turn, adapted quickly, learning to interpret the alien signals and to respond in ways that showed respect and understanding. Over time, these small efforts created a foundation of trust that allowed both humans and aliens to feel safe and connected. The aliens began to contribute to human communities in practical ways. They shared knowledge about sustainable energy, showing humans how to harness natural resources without harming the environment. They taught methods for purifying water, growing food efficiently, and building structures that could withstand natural disasters. Humans were amazed at how practical and effective these lessons were, and they eagerly implemented what they learned. Slowly, the aliens became seen not just as visitors, but as teachers, allies, and partners in building a better world. Life in the community also allowed the aliens to experience aspects of human culture they had never imagined. They attended festivals, watched humans dance, listened to music, and even tried small artistic expressions of their own. Humans showed them games, crafts, and simple ways of sharing joy. The aliens were fascinated by the creativity and spontaneity of human life. While they had once experienced similar celebrations on their home planets, the chaotic, unpredictable nature of human culture felt refreshing and alive. Despite the growing trust, the aliens remained cautious. They understood that humans were fragile in some ways, and that not everyone would accept them immediately. They carefully avoided actions that could be interpreted as threatening, and continued to demonstrate their intentions through consistent, gentle behavior. Humans began to notice these patterns and responded with patience and trust, reinforcing the bond between the two species. Over time, a rhythm emerged, a quiet understanding that both sides were learning from each other, adapting and growing together. The aliens also learned much from humans. They observed the way families cared for each other, how communities organized to help those in need, and how humans showed resilience in the face of challenges. They saw humans recover from natural disasters, assist strangers, and rebuild after conflicts. These observations taught the aliens about perseverance, empathy, and the value of small acts of kindness. In many ways, the humans became teachers, showing the aliens that survival was more than physical endurance. It was also about connection, compassion, and hope. Integration went beyond practical knowledge. Humans and aliens began to share stories. The aliens told tales of stars, distant galaxies, and worlds they had known before exile. They spoke of challenges, triumphs, and the lessons learned from being cast out by the galaxy. Humans shared their own histories, legends, and personal experiences, helping the aliens understand the depth of human life. These stories were more than entertainment. They were bridges between worlds, ways of building empathy and understanding. One of the most remarkable aspects of integration was the development of shared rituals. Humans and aliens found ways to celebrate together, combining elements of both cultures. They marked the changing of seasons, the growth of crops, and small achievements in daily life. These rituals created a sense of belonging for the aliens who had spent so long without home or community. Humans, in turn, discovered new perspectives on life, learning from the alien ways of honoring space, stars, and the cycles of the universe. The rituals became symbols of unity, understanding, and cooperation. Education became another important area of integration. Aliens shared knowledge of advanced sciences, space navigation, and survival techniques, while humans contributed lessons about Earth's ecosystems, languages, and societies. Together, they created new ways of learning that combined human curiosity with alien experience. Students, scientists, and villagers all benefited from this exchange, and the aliens discovered that teaching could be as rewarding as learning. Over time, the exchange of knowledge strengthened bonds, built trust, and expanded horizons for both species. The aliens also participated in community life in subtle, meaningful ways. They helped build structures, repair homes, and assist in farming and resource management. Humans, who had once feared the unknown, now worked alongside the aliens, learning not just technical skills but also lessons about patience, observation, and cooperation. The small acts of everyday life, sharing a meal, repairing a roof, tending a garden, became the foundation for a new society where two species could coexist in harmony. Emotional connections also grew. The aliens began to form friendships with humans, sharing experiences, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. They learned to recognize human emotions, and humans began to understand the alien ways of expressing feelings. Though communication was still imperfect, the bonds were real and meaningful. Over time, fear and suspicion faded, replaced by curiosity, empathy, and respect. These connections showed that integration was not just practical, it was deeply personal. Challenges continued to arise. Some humans remained cautious or skeptical, and some conflicts emerged due to misunderstandings. The aliens responded with patience, teaching humans how to observe carefully and communicate clearly. Slowly, mistrust diminished and a sense of community strengthened. Both humans and aliens learned that integration required time, effort, and willingness to adapt. They learned that mistakes were natural, and that forgiveness, understanding, and persistence were essential for building lasting relationships. Over the months, the aliens began to feel a sense of belonging they had not experienced since their exile. They were no longer drifting through the void alone. They were part of a community that valued cooperation, curiosity, and care. Humans began to see the aliens not as strangers or intruders, but as partners and friends. The integration was not perfect, but it was real, meaningful, and growing stronger every day. The aliens also began to understand humans on a deeper level. They saw the complexity of human emotions, the layers of culture, and the diversity of thought. Humans could be strong and compassionate, creative and resourceful, fragile and resilient all at once. This complexity fascinated the aliens, and they admired it. They realized that life on Earth, though chaotic at times, was rich, meaningful, and full of potential. They had finally found a place where they could learn, grow, and belong. Through this integration, both humans and aliens discovered something important. Coexistence required more than tolerance. It required respect, patience, and shared effort. Humans learned to observe, communicate, and adapt to new ways of thinking, while aliens learned to understand emotions, culture, and community in ways they had never experienced. Together, they built a partnership that went beyond survival, creating a society where knowledge, empathy, and cooperation could thrive. Integration also allowed for small celebrations of life and discovery. Aliens showed humans how to observe the stars and understand the cycles of the cosmos, while humans introduced aliens to music, storytelling, and art. They shared meals, celebrated milestones, and marked seasons together. These shared experiences strengthened bonds and created memories that would last for generations. The aliens, once cast out by the galaxy, had found not just safety but also connection, joy, and purpose. By the end of the first year of integration, the aliens were fully accepted into human communities. They participated in daily life, contributed knowledge, and formed meaningful relationships. Humans had overcome initial fear and suspicion, replaced by curiosity, respect, and collaboration. Together, they had built a foundation of trust and understanding, showing that coexistence between very different species was possible. The aliens, once banished and alone, had found a new home. After months of integration, the aliens began to feel that Earth was no longer just a refuge. It had become home. The forests, rivers, mountains, and cities no longer seemed distant or strange. They had walked among humans, shared meals, exchanged knowledge, and participated in celebrations. Slowly, the sense of fear, caution, and loneliness that had defined their long journey through space was replaced with belonging, trust, and hope. They realized that they were not merely visitors. They were part of a living, breathing community. Each day on Earth brought new discoveries. The aliens were fascinated by the cycles of nature, the way the seasons changed, how plants grew from seeds into trees, and how animals adapted to different environments. They had once traveled among planets, observing life in various forms, but Earth's ecosystems were unique in their complexity and interconnectedness. The aliens marveled at how every creature, every plant, and even the weather seemed to have a purpose. Life on Earth was fragile yet resilient, and they felt a deep respect for the planet and its inhabitants. Humans had grown equally curious about the aliens. They asked questions about distant galaxies, strange planets, and the experiences of beings who had been exiled from their homes. They wanted to understand how the aliens had survived, what they had learned, and how they viewed the universe. The aliens responded patiently, sharing stories of cosmic storms, barren worlds, and lessons of resilience learned from exile. These exchanges deepened understanding and strengthened the bond between species. Humans were not just learning about aliens, they were learning about hope, endurance, and perspective. Integration had also taught both species the value of patience. Neither humans nor aliens expected progress to happen overnight. Every misunderstanding was an opportunity to learn, and every small success built confidence. The aliens had learned to observe human reactions carefully, adjusting their behavior to avoid fear or confusion. Humans had learned to interpret gestures, lights, and subtle signals in ways they had never imagined. Through these efforts, a language of trust and understanding emerged, a language that went beyond words and connected hearts and minds. Work and collaboration became central to daily life. Aliens assisted humans in building homes that could withstand storms, creating irrigation systems for farms, and improving methods for gathering food sustainably. They shared knowledge of energy systems that could harness wind, sun, and water without harming the environment. Humans, in return, taught aliens about Earth's soil, weather patterns, and native plants. Together, they experimented, tested, and implemented solutions that improved life for everyone. These efforts were not just practical, they were symbolic. showing that cooperation could create lasting positive change. Beyond practical knowledge, cultural exchange enriched both species. Aliens observed human art, music, storytelling, and traditions, often participating in small ways. They learned to appreciate the creativity and spontaneity that defined human culture, and humans marveled at the aliens' unique ways of expressing themselves. Shared celebrations became common, festivals combining human and alien traditions, storytelling sessions under starlit skies, and music created together from different perspectives. These events strengthened emotional bonds and created lasting memories, showing that life could be both joyful and meaningful. Humans and aliens also developed ways to teach the younger generations together. Children were fascinated by the aliens' stories of distant worlds and the lessons learned from surviving exile. Aliens, in turn, were fascinated by human curiosity, imagination, and creativity. The children learned not only facts about space and science, but also values like empathy, patience, and respect for life. Education became a shared experience, a bridge between species, and a foundation for future generations to continue the partnership. One of the most profound moments came when the aliens and humans worked together to restore a damaged forest. Years of storms and deforestation had left parts of the land barren, and the community wanted to heal it. Aliens guided humans in planting trees, creating water channels, and protecting wildlife. The project required patience, coordination, and care. It was challenging, but the reward was enormous. Slowly, the forest began to flourish again. Birds returned, rivers ran clear, and small animals thrived. The aliens realized that this act was symbolic of their own journey. They had been broken and lost, but through cooperation and care, they could help restore life and hope. Emotional bonds deepened as well. Aliens and humans shared stories of fear, loss, and hope. They comforted each other during difficult times and celebrated each other's successes. Laughter became a daily part of life, a sound that filled homes, fields, and forests. Even the smallest gestures, holding hands, sharing a meal, helping a neighbor, strengthened trust and friendship. The aliens understood that belonging was not only about safety or shelter, it was about connection, understanding, and shared experiences. Despite the challenges of integration, the aliens felt a growing sense of security. They were no longer exiles drifting through space. They were part of a community that valued them, respected them, and welcomed them as equals. Humans, in turn, had learned to see beyond differences, recognizing that the aliens were not just visitors but teachers, friends, and contributors to a better world. Together, they had created a society where fear was replaced by curiosity, isolation by connection, and uncertainty by trust. The aliens also reflected on the lessons of exile. They had learned that survival alone was not enough, that true life required connection, understanding, and hope. Earth had taught them patience, the value of small gestures, and the power of empathy. Humans had shown them resilience, creativity, and the ability to adapt. Together, both species realized that life was richer when shared, and that differences could be strengths rather than obstacles. Community life continued to grow and evolve. Aliens and humans worked side by side in farms, workshops, and laboratories. They experimented with new ways of living sustainably, protecting natural resources and creating technology that respected the environment. They celebrated achievements together, from the smallest tasks to large milestones. Over time, a sense of shared purpose emerged, a feeling that both humans and aliens were part of something larger than themselves, a living, thriving community. Even as life became routine in some ways, moments of wonder never faded. The aliens still gazed at the stars, remembering the long journey through the galaxy. But now their reflections included gratitude. They had traveled far, survived hardships, and finally found a place where they belonged. Humans, in turn, looked to the sky with curiosity, wondering about the galaxies and planets the aliens had described. Together, they shared a sense of exploration, discovery, and respect for the universe beyond their world. As time passed, the aliens became fully accepted in human society. They participated in decision-making, shared in governance of local communities, and contributed to planning for the future. Their perspectives, shaped by exile and survival, added wisdom to human endeavors. Humans valued their insights, and the aliens valued the opportunity to contribute. Integration was no longer a goal. It had become a reality, creating a society richer, wiser, and more resilient than either species could have achieved alone. The aliens also discovered the deeper joys of everyday life. They learned to cook human foods, enjoy simple pleasures like walking through forests or listening to music, and celebrate life's small victories. They formed friendships, mentorships, and bonds that transcended species. They laughed with humans, mourned losses together, and shared dreams for the future. The long journey through space had been filled with fear and uncertainty, but now life was filled with meaning, purpose, and connection. One particularly memorable day came when humans and aliens gathered to observe a meteor shower. Children ran across fields, pointing at streaks of light, while adults watched silently, reflecting on the vastness of the universe. The aliens, who had once drifted through lonely galaxies, felt a profound sense of gratitude. The stars, which had once reminded them of exile and loss, now inspired hope and wonder. They realized that life, even after hardship, could be beautiful and meaningful when shared with others. Over time, the alien story became a part of human memory and culture. They were no longer outsiders or strangers. They were neighbors, teachers, friends, and family. Their presence reminded humans of the importance of curiosity, empathy, and cooperation. Communities celebrated the journey that had brought them together, honoring the lessons learned from exile, survival, and trust. The aliens had found a home, and humans had gained partners who expanded their understanding of the universe. By the end of the first few years, Earth was no longer simply a refuge for the aliens. It was a place of belonging, creativity, and growth. The forests, rivers, and cities were familiar. The humans were friends, mentors, and collaborators. The aliens had survived exile, found connection, and created a life filled with purpose. They no longer looked at the stars with longing for distant worlds. They looked with gratitude for the life they had built together on Earth. The aliens often reflected on how far they had come. From being banished by the galaxy, drifting alone through cold space, and facing dangers and fear at every turn, they had finally found a place to call home. They had Leah,